Administrator Elwell, we were both in the Air Force. You were a pilot. I wasn't. But my understanding is that the Air Force has a minimum of 2 angle of attack sensors on its planes, and sometimes as many as 4. Does that sound right to you?
So there are different numbers depending on the size of the aircraft.
Right,
yes.
but never one.
As far as I know, never one.
Right.
The planes I flew in the Air Force had at least 2.
Okay. Then is the MCAS a safety critical system in your opinion?
I didn't make that designation, but it seems to me that yes, it is.
Okay, then why would it trigger with a single point of failure? I mean, isn't that kind of standard that we never have a safety critical system trigger off a single point of failure?
Yes, sir. A single point of failure means that if that component or that part of the aircraft fails, it will lead to an accident.
Well, in this case, it led to triggering the MCAS, which is safety critical. Here, let me read you something. I got this from a very, very experienced 737 pilot. If MCAS is not stopped by the pilots at the completion of 2 full MCAS cycles, 10 seconds pause, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, horizontal stabilizer is at or very close to the full nose-down limit of travel. At this point, the pilots do not have enough elevator authority to overcome the horizontal stabilizer, and the nose of the aircraft will continue to fall. The aircraft is no longer controllable in pitch. The only possible recovery is trim the aircraft nose up so the horizontal stabilizer moves to a flyable position. This pilot would characterize an MCAS runaway as having high potential to result in a drastic, abrupt maneuver. That sounds pretty radical. I mean, now, why, in this case, the argument is the pilots are supposed to correct the system, but until after Lion Air, the pilots didn't know the system was installed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the pilots also didn't know that the disagree light didn't work unless you bought the optional package of safety, which included another set. You had both the disagree light, and then you had, I guess, digital gauges that showed what the angle of attack sensors were seeing or feeling or doing. So when did the FAA become aware that the disagree light wasn't working, which had been on, I guess, all previous models of the 737?
Sir, if I could go back to the 737 pilot.
Yep.
I wasn't a 737 pilot in my commercial days, but I had the opportunity to fly the MAX sim a month or so ago. And I would offer on the mechanics of it that at the moment that a pilot, and we're trained our entire careers, the moment you feel the airplane doing something you didn't command it to do, you instinctively trim in the other direction. And if it doesn't work, you do a memory procedure called runaway stab trim. Right. So I'm not going to take issue with his comments about 2 bursts of the MCAS, what it might do, but I know as a pilot.
That's an elapsed time period of 20 seconds.
Yeah,
it's 20 seconds. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty quick. And if you're at a low altitude, I think it's, pretty. But let's go back to the issue of when the FAA was informed by Boeing. Boeing knew, I believe, about a year before they informed the FAA that the disagree light didn't work. Yeah.
So, sir, we've looked at this, and software engineers discovered the anomaly, and the anomaly was tied to the MCAS software. Part of the change of the MCAS.
Right, but the question, I get that. I mean, we can get into details, but the point is, a year elapsed before Boeing told the FAA. What actions did the FAA take at that point in time? Did you consider that inappropriate behavior by Boeing?
So I'm concerned that it took a year, and we're looking into that, and we're going to fix that. Once we learned that the light was not operable, then we made the decision that it is not a safety-critical display. It's not a safety-critical display. It is advisory. There are no actions that the pilot takes to an AOA disagree light. And so it did not.
Well, it would alert them to that whatever the runaway problem is due to, at that point, the angle of attack indicators.
Actually, the notice of that is tactile. One yoke is shaking and the other isn't. That is, by definition,
Right.
AOA disagree. So the light is advisory.
Okay, then why is it there at all?
It's good for maintenance. So if you get an AOA disagree light in flight, you know to tell maintenance on the ground, hey, check, one of these is not calibrated correctly or is off.
So then really you don't think it's significant that Boeing didn't tell people the system was in the plane and didn't tell people that the disagree light didn't work? None of that was problematic.
I think that's an issue, sir, and we're going to look into it. It shouldn't take a year for us to find out that that discovery was made.
I appreciate that, and I really would want to know the answer. And in fact, the Dallas News, and this is off of a tape recording, so I think it's accurate. This was pilots talking to, after they found out that there was an MCAS system in the plane after Lion Air, talking to a Boeing engineer, and they said, why wouldn't you tell us about the system? I don't know that understanding this system would have changed the outcome. He said, in 1,000,000 miles, you're going to maybe fly this airplane, maybe you're once going to see this ever. We try not to overload the crews with information that's unnecessary. I mean, do we really think that that was unnecessary, that it wasn't even in the manual and they didn't know about it? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that manual that you don't really need to know.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I can't comment on that conversation, and I think you were quoting Boeing. I, as a pilot, when I first heard about this, I thought that there should have been more text in the manual about EMCAS. I agree.
And Mr. Lawrence, in response to the chairman, you said that the engineer reports to an engineer. Can that engineer to which the report is rendered also be a manager at Boeing?
They would be a manager in the organizational delegation organization itself.
Could they have managerial status at Boeing and they're paid by Boeing? Is that correct?
They are paid by Boeing. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Just one other question. Now, we've had 14, if we could put up on the screen the flight deck 67, flight deck 17. Well, I thought we were going to put it up. But anyway, I have it here. You can't see it, but you'd be familiar with it. We're getting used to our new electronics. But when you think of it, there it is now. Pretty different airplanes. They're computer screens, GPS, everything's digital, the other's analog, very, very different planes. And this is 14 variations later. And I think we've got to question the system where I think if you took the 737-100 and compared it to a MAX, you would say, wow, these are different types. But we sort of gradually got there, kept moving and moving and moving through 14 variations, and never determined that it would have to go through a more rigorous process as a new type, and including pilot retraining and those sorts of things. I mean, doesn't that raise some questions about how you kind of get this creep over 14 variations over however many years that is, 67, 42 years?
Sir, I know that begs the question. I would remind, though, that the amended type certificate of the MAX was amending the NG. And if you had the NG and the MAX side by side, then you could see the similarities. They're so close as to be amended.
It wasn't the NG amended from the 900,
Correct.
which was amended from the 876 down to 1. So
Yes,
I mean, that's kind of it's kind of a creep, it seems to me. I think there's a question there that we should look at.
Well, and as I said before, in the beginning of your questions, we welcome that examination. If there's something wrong with the extension of a family, and of course, that's something that the 737 has multiple iterations. But again, we're certifying to the last one.
Okay. All right. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.